Hello and welcome to We Can Work It Out, the podcast that explores the history, present and future of workers' rights. I'm your host, Dr. Jonathan Lord. In each episode, we'll be delving into the stories, struggles and successes that have shaped working lives. From friendly societies to people management, we welcome academics, activists, trade unionists, policymakers and workers themselves to help us understand what fair work really means in a changing world. This episode's guest is John Lansdown, one of 786 seafarers dismissed by P&O Ferries on the 17th of March 2022, one of the most shocking corporate acts in modern British employment history. After over 15 years of loyal service, he and his colleagues were abruptly fired via pre-recorded video, a move designed to replace experienced British crews with low-paid agency workers, many earning below the UK minimum wage. Rather than accept silence, John became one of the leading voices exposing the injustice. His decision to speak publicly to Parliament, to national media, and alongside trade unions like the National Union of Rail, Maritime and Transport Workers and Nautilus International helped turn what might have been a quiet redundancy into a major national scandal. He has since become a symbol of worker resistance and moral courage, representing those who lost not only jobs but dignity, rights and trust in Britain's labour protections. John continues to campaign for reform of maritime employment law and stronger enforcement against exploitative corporate practices. His story offers a human face to questions of legal loopholes, corporate governance, and the moral responsibilities of employers in the 21st century. John Lansdown, welcome to We Can Work It Out.
It's a pleasure to be on, Jonathan. Thanks for having me.
That's okay. It's great to have you on the podcast, John. And I know we've worked with each other now and over the past couple of years. So it's fabulous that you've come onto the podcast to talk about your story, which you want to kind of really focus on. So I appreciate it. It might be difficult, and we'll take that into consideration. But can you take us back to that day on the 17th of March, 2022? What do you kind of remember the most vividly about what happened, your reaction, and what you learned from being dismissed on that day?
Yeah, absolutely I can. And I think looking back on this in the nearly 4 years after the event, the thing that really stands out for me was not just how brutal the actions of P&O Ferries were that day, but it was just how quickly they did it. They were able to rip up the employment contracts of nearly 800 seafarers and disrupt their lives, their way of lives, and that of their families in less than 90 seconds. It was so quick. Shock and awe tactics, almost. And to try and address that, it's taken governments years, even working at pace, to address what P&O Ferries did and to put in place legislation to ensure that it can't happen again. And in the UK, that's something that we're still working on. But even in France, where they did work at pace, it took them over a year to bring in legislation to prevent this social dumping on the cross-channel ferry routes. And it was just such a betrayal of everyone who had given the best part of their working lives to P&O Ferries, because they weren't just jobs. They weren't just 9-to-5 jobs. They were very much part of our identity as seafarers, because we lived on board those ships for half the year doing a week on, week off rota pattern. And those that we sailed with, they would become like a second family to us. So there was communities on those ships going backwards and forwards from Hull to the Netherlands, or from Liverpool across the Irish Sea to the island of Ireland, or from Dover across to Calais in France. And not just those communities on board those ships were destroyed, but there was the communities on land that were also bore the brunt of P&O Ferries' corporate misbehaviour, because this has had far-reaching impact on society itself. as our listeners won't be aware, we've conducted some academic research into the actions of P&O Ferries on the 17th of March 2022. And out of those seafarers that responded to our survey, 83% of them said that they experienced significant mental health issues. And that is the legacy of P&O Ferries under the misguided leadership of Peter Hebblethwaite and their Dubai government owners, DP World.
We'll come on to that report because I know it's something that we've been working on for a while now, and it was a difficult read when we looked at some of the responses from interviews and when we spoke to the seafarers like yourself, and I think we spoke to 69 P&O ex-P&O seafarers. It was quite harrowing. So just so people are aware about what happened, could you kind of talk through what happened on the actual day in terms of, because it happened in the morning, didn't it? So were you working time? Were you called into work? What actually happened on the actual day?
Yes. So it was a Thursday morning. We joined the ship for our 1 week tour of duty the previous day. Went downstairs to the galley to start the day ahead. I was told that I better check the emails in our galley office, and there was one in there from the company to say that all the ships have been asked to return to port, discharge passengers, because an announcement would be made later that day that would facilitate the long-term viability of P&O Ferries supported by DP World. And then from there, they put the same thing out on social media to their passengers, and it snowballed from there, really. And I really did think up until the announcement at 11 o'clock that morning that it was going to be fire and rehire, not fire and replace, as it turned out to be.
Yeah.
And the reason I say that is because 1 year before we were sacked, low labour cost operator Irish Ferries started operating out of Dover. And the RMT National Maritime Secretary, Darren Proctor, said, look, this is really bad news. We need to have a campaign against this outfit coming into Dover, because back in 2005, Irish Ferries sacked all their seafarers, some of which were on board vessels when they were in port in British ports, and replaced them with cheap labour from mainly Eastern Europe. So Darren Proctor said, look, we've got to have a big campaign against this company coming here, get the government to bring about some change in legislation. He said, this campaign is vital to protecting our jobs. He said, the arrival of Irish ferries on the Dover to Calais route is a bigger threat that we faced than COVID. And unfortunately, Darren Proctor didn't deliver on that campaign that he promised. He's never, ever been able to give a coherent reason as to why the campaign that he promised was never delivered. He's tried to blame branch representatives from the Dover branch for not doing it. He's also quite bizarrely said that RMT don't know how to campaign. And he said that in the same year that they run the very successful Save Our Ticket Offices campaign. So he's using excuses as to why he didn't do what we could do as a union. Probably the only thing that we could do is campaign and raise public awareness, and he didn't follow through on that. And so, like I say, going back to 17th of March 2022, I saw this coming, but not the fire and replace part, the fire and rehire, yes. So as the morning developed, it became aware to us as union reps on board the ships that there was an email in circulation from a security firm who asked their staff if they wanted to take part in a high-profile mass redundancy exercise for their client. And they'd have to be handcuff trained with body armor, and there's a confidentiality agreement in place. And we also sent reports from crew, replacement crew in coaches in the motorway services in Ashford and outside the port of Kenryan in Scotland as well. So, yeah, everything moved quickly that particular morning with all these reports coming in of replacement crews here and there. Now, I'm sure your listeners will be able to remember the now infamous pre-recorded Zoom video from the 17th of March. That wasn't intended for the crews on the ships. That was intended for the crew that were off duty that week. And that went out at 11 o'clock, that meeting. We were to get told by a third-party agent that P&O had hired to come on board with security guards and tell us in person, but the timings didn't quite work out. We were ordered to go back to port, discharge any cars and lorries that we had, and wait for this third-party agent to come on. However, at 11 o'clock, because the company had sent out the Zoom link to all the off-duty crew, that got spread around quickly, and we were able to watch it ourselves on board, and people were just watching it in disbelief. That's it. Gone. Everything gone today. Thank you very much. See you later. Goodbye. And then the security guards boarded the ship probably half an hour after that pre-recorded Zoom message that people will recall that caused, widespread public and political outrage at the time. And what was really hard that day was see so many good, talented people walking around utterly broken by this. Because we've been kicked out of our jobs, presumably because P&O tried to make a feeble argument that we were too expensive and they needed to employ cheap labour, some of which were on less than £5 an hour, as has been reported by ITV News, and indeed evidence that's been given to the Parliamentary Select Committee. So we were kicked out of our jobs and we were kicked out of our homes the place that we called home on those ships for half of the year, and had our second family destroyed, our own community on those ships. And then there was the fallout on that in the local areas such as Dover, Liverpool, Hull, Kenryan. Yeah, it's the legacy is still felt to this day, and especially of those that suffered from serious mental health issues, because that puts pressure on existing public services, which are already stretched. P&O and DP World should be compensating even further for all of this. They've gotten away with it very, very lightly.
Yeah. So we frog marched off the Pride of Canterbury.
Yeah.
What happened after the message was kind of played to you? What happened after that?
So we were told, get your stuff together and get off. You've got 30 minutes to get your belongings. Here's a piece of paper, write down what you can't take with you, and it'll be delivered to your home address. Some of it never was, in a lot of instances. I mean, it's some photos come into the public domain several days later of people's personal belongings thrown in skips on the ships after we've been frog marched off. Because we've got so much of our own personal belongings on there, and some of the things that were lost were of sentimental value to some of my colleagues as well. I've heard some heartbreaking stories, and I won't name names, but was one gentleman who worked on there sadly passed away a few months before, and his wife had pictures of them, holiday pictures or whatever the case may be, in her cabin. And to this day, I don't know if they ever got them back. Last I heard, they didn't. And it's things like that. It's just so, it was so clinical what they did, so brutal, no compassion, nothing. And it was completely unnecessary as well. Completely unnecessary. And we were frog marched off the ship, said, what, you're going to get your sacking package, as it were, the envelope with what, what happens next once we got off the ship. Because up until that point, we still didn't know that it was fire and replace
Yeah.
until we saw the contents of those envelopes. So seafarers have a thing called a discharge book, and we had to get it's like a passport for seafarers. The captain of the ship was stamping ours as we were getting off, and he kept saying, "You'll be back, you'll be back," to everyone. But what they offered the captains an extra financial incentive to be fired and come back on agency terms, because in order to go in and out of the ports of Dover and Calais, you require what's known in the industry as a pilotage exemption certificate to have the local knowledge of those ports, so they can go in and out without assistance from the local port authorities. So they essentially, not all of them, but many of them, over 70 of them, accepted an additional bribe to go back immediately on agency terms and conditions. So they were fired and rehired. But had they had some respect for their fellow colleagues and for the collective bargaining agreements covered by their unions, they might have not taken, P&O might not have got away with what they were trying to do, because that's what's come to light. They had the people that they needed almost straight away by offering them an extra wad of cash to say, look, re-sign on agency terms and conditions. We need your pilotage exemption certificates. And that's exactly what they did. Like I say, it has been suggested that, they could have shown a bit more respect to their fellow crew members who were also sacked, and a bit of solidarity as well. But given everything that happened, P&O did use shock and awe tactics. So they were just as caught out by the aggressive nature that P&O embarked on that day.
So what happened after you left because when we spoke to some of the other seafarers, they were left at they'd come off the ship and then they couldn't get back to their cars. It was a mile walk. Some of them said.
Yeah.
So what did you do that day? Did you go home? Did you go and speak to family and friends? What did you do?
No, that day I went straight to the RMT Union office in Dover, and protests began there along the A20 leading to the port, because all the ships were still alongside in the ports which they were based. They couldn't sail because they had a new crew on board, and that's when it took off from there. Really, the intense media coverage of it all, and the public and political backlash from it. Remember as well, in the context of the time, just a month before, we saw Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine, and that was dominating the news cycle then. But P&O managed to become front page news when all that atrocity that's happening in Ukraine is going on. Quite remarkable, really. And it was for days and days. It was front page and headline news.
I know, because you were all over the media at the time. That's how we connected, because I was providing some commentary on it as well, and that's how we kind of connected about it. It was prevalent all over, the radio and television, because I think it was a cross-party reaction at the time. We'll go into that later, but it was a cross-party reaction politically, but I think publicly as well. I think most people saw what was going on and thought this is really unjust what was going on. So you mentioned the agency crews who were kind of standing by. When were you fully aware that they were there and ready to kind of take over?
So it was when the third-party agent come on the ship and said, "You've lost your jobs." The security teams escorted the replacement crew on board as well that day. And they were from Eastern Europe initially. They were hired by a company called IFM, International Ferry Management Limited, that had been recently set up.
Yeah.
I think it was registered in Cyprus, if I recall off the top of my head. again, it was just a front company to employ these people on the very, very short term. And then they started bringing in seafarers from further afield, Asia, places like that.
Yeah, and I know we've found some pictures, haven't we, with boxes full of crew
Yeah,
uniforms as well. So they were all kind of prepared. It was all very well planned as well.
yeah.
'Cause
With military precision, they planned that.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
A colleague and friend of mine from Nautilus International Trade Union said it was planned with military precision. What they did that day, they kept it secret for so long. But I will say that they kept it secret. There was a rumor in early 2022 that it was going to be a big announcement by the company. This was going on, big announcement. And what happened was they brought in this new performance management tool. So that how we used to do appraisals before with the job chats, they changed it to something called HPC, high performance culture. And there was the rollout of that to the, trained on how we're going to, do appraisals for our teams going forward. So almost they used that as a bit of a smokescreen. But they executed it with military precision, and that is why that I'm not in a position to sit here and today and name names, but there is a newspaper, a Sunday newspaper, who have spent a lot of money and a lot of resources on ongoing investigation into the person that they believed was hired by P&O Ferries to put this plan together. Because the people that were the top of that organisation at the time, they didn't have the expertise to put something together like this. No, Peter Hebblethwaite, definitely not. Definitely not. They had and the name that this newspaper's told me that was allegedly the hired gun, if you were, to put the plan together. Yeah. I know who this person is. You know who this person is. And hopefully in due course, the public will know who this individual is that was hired by P&O for their or so-called expertise, but certainly their contacts of this in this industry and beyond in putting such a plan together.
So part of P&O's plan was because you were effectively sacked, which meant that you no longer P&O employees on the 17th of March. That was the tactic, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So it was a tactic for them to kind of circumnavigate redundancy consultation procedures, but also that you couldn't kind of challenge it through the trade unions as well. So they offered settlement agreements to everybody. Do you want to talk about your experience with that settlement agreement and then eventually what you did about it as well? Because I think a lot of the public response as well, you've received a kind of redundancy package.
Yeah.
But in terms of you, John, what did you do when you were offered the settlement?
Well, I rejected the settlement in its entirety. And I chose to pursue P&O Ferries via the employment tribunal system. And as has been widely reported, after that case was submitted, further down the line, P&O wanted to come to the table and say, yeah, hands up, Gov, it's a fair cop. We'd like to admit what the accusation of unfair dismissal. We'd like to settle. And yeah, that's so what I was offered initially. Had it not been as high profile, I would never have got more than that at tribunal. Because the severance package was in 3 parts. So we got 2.5 weeks pay per year of service. We got 90 days pay in lieu of notice, and we got an additional 90 days pay to cover something that's what's known in employment law as the protective award. So P&O were meant to consult with the recognised trade unions. That was the RMC and Nautilus. They chose not to do that. They chose to disregard employment law. Now, the remedy for that at employment tribunal is capped at 90 days of a person's salary. So P&O, therefore, could calculate with precision exactly how much it would cost them to buy themselves out of any sanction at employment tribunal. And that's exactly what they did. But they weren't counting, they made a big assumption that everyone would accept it. But they weren't counting on someone like me, who would say, no, actually, on a point of principle, I'm not going to accept this. It's not about the money. This is about the principle. This is about getting justice for myself and the other nearly 800 of us who were sacked, and our families and friends. And that's exactly what we did. We got a moral victory because P&O said, yeah, unfair dismissal.
Yeah.
It for sale was a redundancy. This wasn't a redundancy program. This was a straight up unlawful mass sacking. Had it been a redundancy, we would have been transferred under existing legislation onto new terms and conditions with a new employer, a third party agency, or whatever ideas they may or may not have had. So, yeah, that in itself is a whole story, the tribunal process, because tellingly, some of my colleagues who were on French contracts, and there was only a few of them, and I think it's really important to distinguish this because some people have mistakenly made the argument, oh, this only happened because we left the EU. Right? That wasn't the case at all. That I voted to remain. Whether we were in the EU or not, this would have still have happened, like it happened in 2005 with Irish Ferries and their crew. Both countries, UK and Ireland, were in the members of the EU at the time, and it happened in British ports in some cases. So being a member of the EU or not had nothing at all to do with this. And I think that's a really important point because sometimes that gets hijacked for those that want to push a certain narrative. Now, importantly, maybe two handfuls of my colleagues were on French contracts, and they weren't affected by this. Simple reason being, the remedy for breaches of employment law in France is way more severe than what it is in the UK. They're actually meaningful. So, for example, if one of those colleagues on French contracts were treated in the same way as we were, they could have been hit with huge fines, and the directors of the companies could have received custodial prison sentences.
Yeah.
And that's such a huge deterrent for anyone who thinks they can just break the law. You've got to have meaningful sanctions in place. Otherwise, you'll get rogue operators like P&O Ferries come along, backed with billions of pounds from their Dubai government owned parent company, just thinking, well, we can do what we like. We've got the money. We know how much it's going to cost to buy ourselves out of it. It's no different from Peter Hebblethwaite speeding down the motorway. Oh, it's 70 miles an hour. So what? I'm going to go 120 because I know the speeding ticket is going to be X amount of money and I can pay that. So I'm going to go at 120 instead. Not accusing him of being banned for speeding or anything like that, just to make that clear. Yeah, they just a brazen approach. Oh, we're above the law. We can do what we want. And they did. They did.
Peter Hebblethwaite in the Commons Select Committee when he got grilled. So Peter Hebblethwaite was the chief executive officer of P&O Ferries. He's now resigned recently, or he's retired from the position. But he actually admitted that he broke the law, and he's a director of a company, and there was no sanctions against that. And like you said, if you admit to breaking the law, there should be some kind of sanction about that. Especially in these circumstances that affected so many people. Going back to the tribunal, then, so you took P&O Ferries to an employment tribunal. I think the main thing for you was to get a recognition that it was unfair dismissal, and did they put that in writing? Did they admit that you were unfairly dismissed?
Yes, they did. Yes, yeah,
Yeah.
which they didn't admit at the time.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
didn't admit. They just said, "Oh, it was a redundancy, or we had to do it. Otherwise, we'd have to shut down the company." Because all those excuses they gave at the time, they don't hold up to scrutiny. Because since the day we were sacked, P&O embarked on a program of redundancies, shore-based redundancies, and the Sunday Times reported on this extensively, and it was known internally as Operation Fleet. It was a rolling program of redundancies. So this wasn't to save the company or save 2,200 jobs. This was about greed, corporate greed.
Mm.
And they keep saying, "Oh, all we want was a level playing field," because they were competing against Irish ferries who were undercutting them on wage cost. DFDS weren't; they're still paying decent wages. A very good operator, a very good employer, collectively bargained terms and conditions. So P&O just thought, well, we go down that route as well,
Yeah.
the same route as Irish ferries.
To wrap up the employment tribunal aspect of things, then.
Yeah.
So you I wouldn't say settled, but you agreed not to kind of progress to the actual tribunal hearing because P&O Ferries put it in writing that you were unfairly
Yeah.
dismissed. And you don't have to talk about this if you don't want, but the settlement agreement, you actually donated the money to two charities, didn't you, as well?
Yeah. So the money went to the Sailors Children's Society.
Right.
They're a charity based in Hull in Yorkshire, and they do really good work. The children of seafaring families that have found themselves upon hard times, especially in this cost of living crisis that we're going through, and they do what they can to help there, because it was never about the money, never ever about
Mm.
the money. It was always about the principle. It was about right and wrong. This was about justice. And I'd like younger generations to have the same opportunities that I was afforded at the start of my career at sea,
Yeah.
because they're diminishing all the time.
Mm.
Those opportunities, it's being evaporated, and that's thanks to the behaviour of people like P&O Ferries and Irish Ferries, for that
Mm.
matter. But this government this is where they have to, they have to legislate meaningful legislation. The French have done it, and we're seeing now the Labour government are taking steps to do the right thing, bring in the protections that are required, and they do need to go further on that. But unfortunately, under the previous Conservative government, there was a lot of hand-wringing and nothing happened,
Mm.
which was a shame. It was a betrayal of working people. But
Yeah.
in actual fact, you could go back even further. When Irish Ferries did what they did, had the government of the day then acted as the unions and many MPs were telling them to at the time, we wouldn't have had this now in 2022. And look, when you and I have done research into fire and rehire and fire and replace, the earliest examples that I've been able to find in the 21st century of this type of behaviour was in 2005, and just prior to that as well. And there was a chap by the name of Sir Anthony Charles Linton Blair, more commonly known as Tony Blair, former Prime Minister.
That's his full
And
title, yeah.
yes, apparently so. Now, when there was the dispute with the firefighters, Tony Blair was considering firing them and replacing them with "quote unquote" new personnel. And that is a story that's in the public domain, thanks to his then press secretary, Alistair Campbell's, in his memoirs that he wrote. I think it was in the one, the Alistair Campbell Diaries, the road to Iraq, Volume 3, something like that, where
Yeah.
he's made mention of. So you had a British Prime Minister considering fire and replace. Then you had the Gate Gourmet sacking scandal in 2005.
Yeah.
And that was the Gate Gourmet who provided airline catering at Heathrow to many of the airlines there. They sacked their workers on their morning tea break and replaced them with busloads of cheaper workers from Eastern Europe. Um, all before the days of social media. It got very little press coverage at the time. And then that same year, we saw the scandal with the Irish ferries sackings. I'll say one of their ships was alongside in Wales when that happened. And we could have legislated then to prevent this from happening again, but it was a political choice not to. And we are where we are with it. So you can blame the Conservative government for not acting in 2022, and you can go back further than that as well.
Yeah, I think if you look at the history of work, it goes back probably hundreds of years where
Yes.
things could have been stopped. Practices like this could have been stopped easily. Yeah. In terms of your role, then, so after the sacking and during your tribunal claim, and then after the tribunal claim, you've been very high profile. About speaking out about these things. And that's not to say that other seafarers who were sacked probably didn't want to speak out, but we understand from speaking to the seafarers in our research that there was a non-disclosure agreement signed, so they weren't able to talk about it, which is a tactic that is often used. So what was the reaction to you being so prominent in the press and highlighting what went on? What was the response from your colleagues? What was the response from the wider public about what you were talking about?
The wider public were very supportive, as were the vast majority of many of my former colleagues, with the exception of probably two. Because it only ever takes one to speak out. And with all of these injustices, that's such an emotive issue. Like I said, they weren't just our jobs, they were our homes for half the year. And you need to bring that to life somehow. You need someone to tell the story of it, I suppose. We've seen so many, way worse than this. But for example, the post office with the injustice against the sub postmasters.
Yeah.
Alan Bates led the charge, and he became the public face of all those sub postmasters that were the victims of such a grotesque miscarriage of justice that continues to still be the case until it's remedied in full for all of them. And because of the Alan Bates and others, Lee Castleton, and I could go on. They brought this story to life. They brought this story into people's living rooms to say, look, this is what happens. There's no check and balances on this sort of things. We were the victims of this miscarriage of justice. And whilst not a direct comparison, the point that I tried to make and continue to try and make, it could happen to anyone tomorrow, shore workers or seafarers. Until there's, we've got a lot of employment rights, no doubt about that. But what we need is power. We need to see a redress of that because there is a power imbalance. Most employers are fair-minded, but you need those protections for the one that are not, that going to take advantage and undercut other businesses, undercut other employers. It's because of actions like the actions of P&O Ferries and their Dubai government-owned parent company, DP World, that we need these robust protections in place, similar to they have in France. Let's see, custodial sentences for those that want to just flagrantly disregard the law for such things as this.
Did you feel intimidated at all, or pressured to stay quiet?
No, they try to. They couldn't intimidate. They couldn't intimidate me.
Without naming names, without naming names, who are you referring to? Individuals, the company?
Yeah, they all, the whole thing. I was so many people advised me, look, the story's gone all the way around the world, just take the money and go. And that even my own union didn't want to support me on this,
Mm.
unfortunately. But I've been very blessed, shall we say, to spend so many of my formative years here in Cape Town in South Africa, and the influences from so many people here who took part in the struggle against apartheid. Um, that rubs off on other people.
Mm.
When you're fighting, it is okay to get angry against injustice. Of course, it is.
Mm.
And I've had some really good role models here to especially amongst the Cape Malay uh, community, and that sort of formed who I am as a person today. So no matter whatever they try to do, they didn't. They I won't be intimidated by them. They can't intimidate. They can't
Mm.
intimidate me. And then they've got unbelievable resources, billions and billions of pounds. Um, yeah, of course, and they do. They do try and squash people, keep them quiet, and that's what they try to do with everyone else. But I was able to speak out on behalf of everyone and still have that voice, because
Mm.
sometimes these things, it's bigger than money, it's bigger than these payoffs, because the damage that P&O have done is immeasurable.
Mm.
It is immeasurable, and we need to redress that, and we need to bring back these jobs on these ferries for the next generation, the generation after them. And if no one's willing to speak up and, campaign and fight back, then yeah, only ever takes one.
Mm.
Only ever takes one.
I agree with
Yeah.
that. Then it snowballs, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And what I've learned from talking to you about what happened is you call it a community. It isn't just, and it's the way probably P&O approached it. They probably thought it's 786 jobs that need to go, and some come back on lesser terms and conditions,
Yes.
so they'll save a bit of money. But the P&O Ferries, the listeners, you can look at this up. They're owned by DP World. Their turnover is in the billions. So
Yeah.
it's not as if they're a really struggling company that haven't got potentially a safety net behind them as well. That's up for debate, because the companies have to be profitable, I suppose, on their own standing. But when you're decimating a community and an industry, because
Yeah.
from what we've learned, the industry's been decimated. I'll ask you a question about what happened, in the weeks after the sackings in terms of P&O Ferries and not being able to sail some of the ships
Mm.
because of the lack of skills and experience that's required. But it is important to know the structure of P&O Ferries in terms of its company structure and who owns it, and how they could have approached this in a different way. Just a final point on then the reaction to yourself.
Yeah.
Do you think there's been a change in public attitude towards corporate responsibility, or do you just think it's the same as before what happened?
Yeah, I think there has been a change. However, society's under so much pressure at the moment. Cost of living crisis that
Mm.
continues. It's been going on since before the P&O scandal until now. Everyone's fighting their own individual struggles. It's getting harder and harder for people as well, especially everyone's income is being squeezed more and more. But yeah, definitely it's raised more awareness. It's not just through P&O. The other thing, again, I'll go back to the post office.
Mm.
We've seen that. We've seen. Um, you can go back. I just think now, the infected blood scandal, the phone hacking scandal that saw the closing down of the news of the world. That all these things that were emotive issues, and it was only because of the public outrage that we saw change happen.
Mm.
The post office scandal that was reported on from, I think, 2009 in Computer Weekly, then Private Eye magazine
Yeah.
reported on it regularly. Then the fantastic John Sweeney reported on it for BBC Panorama in 2016. It was called The Trouble at the Post Office. And it was in the public domain. And there was, people, MPs speaking up about this. And solicitors like Neil Hudgell, that done a lot of work to represent the wrong sub postmasters.
Yeah.
Then, the campaigners as well. But it only really caught the public's eye with the ITV drama that we saw in January before last. And it took what was that? That took, sort of nearly 15 years or so for it really to become mainstream. And it was only then did we see the redress start to be sped up, but it's not moving quick enough. People are still passing away and they haven't got their fair compensation. So it's the same with this. Unless people are, unless you keep coming back, you're not going to make the change. You've got to keep chipping away. And that's one thing that I've learned from friends here when it comes to injustice. It's good to be a matter of principle. You're speaking, you've got truth on your side. Fantastic. And you keep going, Because it's not about me as an individual. It never has been. I couldn't sit by and see all my colleagues treated with such utter contempt by a company that many of us were proud to work for. We really were. I couldn't sit by. It was about the much bigger picture and the impact that this have on wider society as well. And like I say, I certainly didn't plan on becoming the public face. It was just about standing up for basic decency, for maritime workers' rights, for the rights for everyone. Because what happened to us could happen to someone working shoreside.
Yeah,
it's the same legislation or the loopholes and on the lax legislation applies to all of us on land or sea in the UK.
Well, in our research with we spoke to around, it was 70 in the end, wasn't it? 67% of seafarers that we corresponded with no longer work in the seafaring sector.
Yeah.
So 2/3 of seafarers have left, and the amount of years service that's been lost, the experience, the skills, the knowledge that's been lost.
Yeah.
You can align it to the miners. There's no doubt about that. But there's other industries that have been decimated as well, and it's difficult to come back from that. I mentioned before about P&O Ferries and the problems they had immediately after the sackings by losing so many staff. Can you talk about some of the instances where some of the ships weren't allowed to operate,
Yes.
and why that was the case?
So, P&O, under the leadership of P&O at the time, thought it was just straightforward, just to change the whole crew. They didn't realise the reason we're there in the first place is for safety. And you've got the ships are they're a complex environment, and you've got to have familiarity with the vessel that you're working with, and just as importantly, familiarity with your own colleagues, because as I say, we're there for safety. God forbid there's an emergency, then we all we depend on each other our training kicks in. But they thought they could just change the whole crew, and that would be business as usual. And the regulator, the Maritime and Coast Guard Agency, went and did inspections of the vessels, and asked to see training exercises, and they deemed those ships weren't safe to sail. So they were detained until such time as they thought they were be able to pass the appropriate inspections. And I don't think P&O were counting on that as well, because that went on for weeks afterwards. Those ships were alongside. And all the disruption that caused to the flow of, food and medicine into the country as well.
Yeah.
Because that's such a vital route. 15% of all our goods that we import come in on the Dover to Calais route, specifically with P&O. So yeah,
it's incredible though, isn't it? Sorry, it's incredible that I just thought you can look at it and think, well, the primary thing they were looking at was saving money. That's what with redundancy, that's what redundancy is for. It's essentially
Yeah,
really to save money. I know there are other things wrapped around it, but it's usually around saving money. And they've
yeah,
obviously focused on that. But how on earth they didn't think about the continuation of the operation after the redundancies? But that's what gets left out, and that's why it shows you the lack of
yeah.
empathy for the sackings in the way they did it, and also the lack of foresight into thinking, well, okay, how will things operate? But I don't think they even consider it. A lot of companies don't. They just think that we need to save money. We'll worry about
Yeah.
how things operate afterwards. So looking back now, it isn't surprising. But at
Uh,
the time, I was surprised. I didn't even think about, were these ships able to sail and were they able to operate in the usual
well,
manner?
and that, as you rightly said, is something that they didn't take into account because they didn't
Mm-mm.
know. They weren't from the industry. And I could give a classic example would that be to get to become an operations manager shoreside at P&O or head of operations. You had to start at the bottom as a steward or a chef and work your way up. And there was one instance with one of our former operations managers, Nigel, the late Nigel Davis. He told me many years ago, he was sat in a meeting. This is quite, a good, over a decade ago, sat in a meeting, an operations meeting, with other senior management and directors. I won't name which director was, but one director said in the meeting, well, um, the person that serves me my coffee in Pret a Manger is on £12,000 a year. Why are we paying stewards on the ship who serve coffee 25, 30 pound a year? So it had to be explained to this director that actually these people are seafarers. They're here first and foremost for safety. They're
Mm,
trained professional seafarers. What they do as a trade on the ship, whether that be in the onboard services or the deck department or the engineering department, is secondary to that. First and foremost, they're professional seafarers, and it was lost on that particular director but that's what happens, you see.
mm,
Um, it's called the Peter Principle, I believe. I believe that's what um, is taught these days in university. The Peter Principle is when someone is promoted to their level of incompetence.
mm.
Not just here, you're seeing so many across the world.
Absolutely is. I think people are sometimes promoted based on their
Yeah,
ability, maybe to do a job or a certain
yeah,
aspect of the job,
yeah,
and then they're promoted, and then they're not able to carry out that enhanced role, whether it's leadership or whether it's a higher technical role as well. It's
mm,
certainly that's something that does happen, and that companies do flounder with as well.
yeah,
Moving on to the kind of government response, the trade union response, because I think we need to kind of focus on that because that
yeah,
came out quite strongly in the research. Let's focus on the government initially. They branded this as branded the sackings as illegal,
yeah.
but the enforcement against this illegality has been, I think, almost non-existent. I can't really think really what they've done about it. I know they've tried to introduce the Seafarer Charter and some types of
Mm,
legislation, but it's not enforced by the government. It's enforced by the Port Authority in
yeah.
most of those areas of law. How can you encapsulate the government response?
So the Conservative government response, in spite of all the hand wringing, was pitiful. It really was absolutely pitiful.
Yeah.
The current Labour government has done much better on that, but there's still work to be done. We're going to see the Seafarers Charter become mandatory for certainly for ferry operators, and the scope of that is going to be looked to be widened in due course. But there is still a long way to go. But the Conservatives could have done this, and it can't not make it party political because everyone has had an influence, in this matter at some point or another. The then Conservative government were an absolute shambles with this. They not not only did they let down myself and my colleagues, they let down the entire country, because what they did was effectively say, well, yeah, there's going to be lots of hand wringing about it and lots of shouty words, but at the end of the day, come and do what you want. If you want to race to the bottom, be our guest. There's, that's the green light you need. Look what's happened with P&O. We didn't take any action, in spite of the outrage that it caused at the time. But look, the then minister, Robert Courts, I think him on a personal level, I think he would have liked to have gone much further. But those around him in the Boris Johnson government, yeah, they were too worried about the investment with DP World and all the rest of it, and that's their ideology as well. The public seem to forget. So the whole, because that was, you could call that the Brexit government. Boris Johnson, that was, they were elected on a mandate of get Brexit done, and many of these ministers contributed to a book called Britannia Unchained. Priti Patel was one of them, Dominic Raab, Kwasi Kwarteng, if I'm not mistaken. And the whole agenda of this book, Britannia Unchained, is about a race to the bottom. They describe British workers as lazy. It's
Wow.
incredible, Rick. It's incredible, really. So we shouldn't be surprised when a when an anti-worker government allows a company to get away with such as P&O, to get away with what they did.
What was the response from yourself and what you heard from the trade unions as well in the research that, the ex-seafarers or some of the seafarers that might be still working in the sector said that they were disappointed by the response? There is the caveat, and I know we've looked at this and we've looked at some of the, the really good legal responses around this accusation that the trade unions didn't do very much, mainly the RMT and Nautilus, obviously, because there were two unions that were cited in our research. But there was a feeling that there wasn't that much of a response from the unions. The legal caveat to that, which has been really well discussed, was that because you were sacked on the day, you were no longer employees of P&O Ferries, so therefore it was virtually impossible for the unions to act legally on your behalf because of the the regulations that are in place now. So there is that, but there was a feeling from the research and from what you said that there could have been more done. What are your feelings around the response of the unions, and what would you have liked to see happen?
So you're absolutely right in the fact that their hands were tied pretty much. For them to take to get an injunction against this would have been really unaffordable, the way the process is structured, because they could have been liable for P&O's losses, and that's a separate issue for another time. But on a personal level, they walked the other way when it came to supporting me, because it was myself and others asking, what's the legal opinion on this? And I've since been told in private by Labour MPs, some of whom were members of the RMT parliamentary group, that the RMT didn't want to say to people like me and others, this is a good offer or a bad offer. They just wanted people not to accept the offer. But that was never communicated. And that was partly, so I'm told, one of the reasons why we ended up where it went all the way up to the 31st of March deadline to sign the gagging order and accept the payoff from P&O. We didn't receive a legal opinion from the union. It was only because of external pressure on the union after the 31st of March deadline did they finally come forward to me and say, this is our legal opinion. And the opinion was, accept the offer. Because on the basis that you're not going to get more at tribunal technically you're not going to get more at tribunal than what you were offered by them. Because as we've covered before, P&O were able to calculate with precision exactly how much it would cost them to do that. And we do need to see unions be able to get injunctions against this sort of thing. Absolutely. But what this doesn't do, it doesn't excuse the gross negligence and the gross incompetence of the incumbent RMT National Maritime Secretary, Darren Proctor, because we rewind back to 1 year before the sackings, he said to RMT members and RMT reps that the arrival of Irish ferries at the port of Dover will be the biggest threat that we face to those jobs on P&O, bigger than COVID. We had this huge campaign, never delivered on it. And as I've said before, he's never been able to give an explanation as to why that never happened. He sought to blame others and, obfuscate. But yeah, that's for him to answer. But do unions need to be able to injunct? Yeah, absolutely they do. And unfortunately, it's because of people like Darren Proctor, and that undermines the good work that unions do. There's many good people in the RMT and in Nautilus who do a fantastic job day in, day out. But I use quite strong language against him in the press release after the settlement with P&O that he's effectively stealing a living off the backs of seafarers that he should be representing, because can he change the law himself? No, of course he can't. Could he have led a campaign, a public awareness campaign like he promised to do a year before we were set? Absolutely. That's the one thing that we can do as a union. Whether it would have changed the outcome a year later or not is irrelevant. We should have done what was promised and what was said was a requirement to do, an absolute requirement by Darren Proctor. But only he can answer why he chose not to do that. But certainly when it comes to supporting me, it was an absolute disgrace, really. And I think a lot of that was down to who it was speaking out rather than the actually on paper as well. So
The insolvency service later decided that they carried out an initial investigation, didn't they? But the insolvency service decided not to pursue criminal charges against P&O executives. What do you think their reasoning behind that was, and what's your reaction to it?
So I was very disappointed when that was announced in August 2022. And I know they're still conducting the civil investigation. They should have pursued the criminal charges and put it before a court and let the court decide. Not say there was insufficient evidence, because people like Professor Alan Bogg have made the case why it would be inconceivable for the law to be structured in that way in the first place. The argument that they've used, they should have gone for it. They should have, but again, it's they're dealing with corporations with billions behind them, and there may have been political pressure, probably was, knowing the government of the day and their policies as well, and the context of the time. Remember, this is post-Brexit as well. They're desperate for investment into the country. They take it off anyone. And look, I'll go back to that book, Britannia Unchained. Liz Truss also, she contributed to that book, as well as Priti Patel and Kwasi Kwarteng and Dominic Rubb. And just to remind your listeners of what they said in that book, they said the British are among the worst idlers in the world. We work among the lowest hours, we retire early, and our productivity is poor. Whereas Indian children aspire to be doctors or businessmen, the British are more interested in football and pop music. And that's the senior figures within that Boris Johnson's government of the time. Yeah. And is it any wonder when that's what they believe, they let P&O get away with doing what they did? People need to know this. People
That,
need to know who they're electing. It's not, it's not, oh, good old Boris, look at him, he's a bit of a laugh. No,
mm,
he doesn't give two hoots about the
mm.
majority of people in this country. Doesn't give two hoots about society or workers' rights or the NHS.
What's been the impact on? Because you spoke really movingly about things,
Mm,
about what happened and the kind of consequences. But do you think what's been lost by what happened 3.5 years ago?
yeah,
Not just in jobs, but the kind of identity and community a result of P&O's
yeah,
decision.
yeah. Community destroyers. Uh, it still is such an emotive issue because we've all experienced turbulence in our life from one extent to the other. Because those jobs, being a seafarer was very much part of our identity. And we were incredibly proud to work for P&O Ferries. And it's, look, there isn't a day that's gone by where I haven't either heard or seen about the impact that the actions of P&O Ferries has had on either the physical or the mental well-being of very many of my former colleagues. And that will continue that will continue to be the case for many, many years to come. Yeah, it's affected me on a personal level. Of course it has. It's affected my relationship at times with family and friends, because it is such an emotive issue. Um, and it's, yeah, look, again, we were angry, we were hurt, we felt betrayed. But I was determined to make sure um, what happened to us wasn't quietly brushed under the carpet, and more importantly, that it can't be allowed to happen again to anyone. I
Mm,
don't want anyone to go through what we went through ever again. This has got to be a line in the sand now, yeah, because it's insidious. And as for my colleagues who can't speak out, I couldn't even comprehend what it would be like. Incredibly frustrating because they've lost their voice.
mm,
And now they're all angry and upset, way more than what I am. There's some of them, they can't even put their lives back together. They haven't been able to.
mm,
And look, rightly or wrongly, many of us were institutionalized after spending 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30 years on those ships. Generational jobs for many. Their fathers did it, their mothers did it, their grandfathers, their grandmothers, their sisters, their brothers, aunts, their uncles. Gone, just like that. It's incredibly hard. Um, but the whole process of with the media spotlight, and then I felt not only was I battling P&O and DP World through the tribunal system, but also my own union by trying to convince them to actually come and support me. Um, and it was only when they were, pressured to, after many months into or past the 31st of March deadline, did they actually come, and they made me an offer, but it was just well short of what was required. But it
mm.
shouldn't have had to have come to that in the first place. But yeah, um, yeah, it is hard, and I really, like I say, really don't want to see anyone go through this because yeah, it's it's affected my relationship with family and friends. Um, we're thankful that we've got understanding family and friends who can support us through all of this because it hasn't been easy. It hasn't been easy at all. It really hasn't. But we've done it for the right reasons. And I'm proud to be able to speak out for all of those P&O seafarers that were treated absolutely abominably.
Do you still keep in touch with your fellow P&O workers?
Yeah, yeah, of course, yeah, yeah, I
Yeah.
do. Lots of them. Um, like someone myself, I was painted in such strong P&O colours. It was very much part of our identity, and we had good fun on there. We had very, very high standards. and we worked very hard, and we had done it with a smile on our face the majority of the time. You know, we got through COVID together. Um, um, yeah, we got through, you know, the long, hard days. We smiled together, we laughed together, we joked together, we lived together on the same ship, we argued together. It was just like a, you know, our own little community on those ships. Yeah, and there's many of them that I still remain in touch with.
In terms of the future, then we haven't really touched on the flags of convenience, have we? Because I'm trying to
No.
think about you know how these types of things can be stopped. The flags of convenience. This is whereby ships register in not necessarily the countries where they are sailing. They are registering in a beneficial country where they get beneficial benefits in terms of workers' rights, in terms of the employer having benefits. So there's not as good employment rights for the workers. So they'll come outside of the UK, for example, where there's minimum wage and other employment rights. On the registering a company where there's different or lesser employment rights.
Yeah.
And that's known as the flags of convenience. Do you think there's anything else that needs to happen that can stop this from happening again in the future?
The remedies for breaching existing and new legislation needs to be much tougher. Like I say, take a leaf out of the French book. Custodial sentences for directors of those companies who wish to break employment law. And they did, P&O didn't do it to the few that were on French contracts. So that in itself, that speaks quite loudly. That's what needs to happen. Make it meaningful. People, look, you turn on the news, you see about Thames Water, how they polluted the River Thames. What's happened to any of their directors? Nothing, really. There needs to be accountability. Paula Reynolds from the post office, the chief executive, she's still walking around free. They're still waiting for the public inquiry to finish, which I'm sure then she will be arrested, charged, and hopefully prosecuted for overseeing that organisation's crimes against those sub postmasters. But we need to see accountability. Because right now the point that I've always tried to make, this could happen again tomorrow to anyone. This could happen again tomorrow. Shore-based workers, anyone. You don't have to be a seafarer. It's happened before. It happened with the Gate Gourmet sacking scandal in 2005, Irish ferries. But the flags of convenience, yeah, it's another issue. P&O reflagged in 2019. However, back in the early 2000s, the UK government of the day encouraged ship owners to be on the under a UK flag and they benefited to the tune of over £2 billion in tax relief via the tonnage tax scheme. And the lobby group that represents a lot of these ship owners, the UK Chamber of Shipping, they would have used their direct access to government to lobby for more favourable terms for the ship owners that they represent. So there's a lot of responsibility there as well that needs to be. But ultimately, governments, they've got their hands on the levers of power. They've got the majority in Parliament. They can bring forward legislation. They can beef up existing legislation. Do it. It's what I don't know what everyone's so scared for. Do it. France does it. Other countries do it. They can't say, "Oh well, we won't get." No, we will. People, there's multinationals invest in France. They don't say, "Oh, we won't invest there because their employment laws are too strict." No, it's a good thing because it gives a level playing field. And it stops this sort of thing from happening. It stops good employers like DFDS and Stena Line from being undercut by P&O Ferries and Irish ferries. So, yeah, stronger laws are a good thing. We need to do it.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think there's a short-term benefit in terms of cost savings, but you can see in the long term, it's happened with lots of companies
Yeah.
where, you know, companies have done fire and rehire or fire and replace,
Yeah.
and there's a lesser service provided in a lot of these cases. It decimates communities, it decimates society. So you've got to get a balance. I mean, you know, companies have to operate, and they have to operate profitably or in a productive way. But you can see through our research the impact that this has had on individuals, on communities, and potentially the sector. I think, you know, it still is early days, I think, to analyse it properly. But I think I would probably say 5 or 10 years, looking back, that's when you'll see the biggest
Yeah.
impact. That's when you'll see the biggest impact.
Yeah. And that's what we hope the legacy will be, that there's going to be lasting change. And we can look back and we can say, actually, the legislation that the Labour government have brought forward with the Employment Rights Bill, that is that will completely change the landscape of employment practices going forward, as it should do, and that's what it's intended to do. And we need to see more of it. We really do. We need to be leaders in this sort of thing, not act retrospectively, because what P&O did, they did with a 90-second pre-recorded Zoom, and it took the French government over a year to bring about change. And it's taken the UK government even longer to bring about change. So that's the thing. It takes seconds for a rogue operator to do such things, and years. Saying the legacy of this will be felt in communities for many, many years to come. Shame.
Well, yeah, it is a shame, but it's been really good of you to talk to us today, John. And I know I mentioned at the very start, it is still very emotive for you. I've been involved with you for 3 years now, and it's incredible how you've been persistent and dogged with your determination that doesn't happen again to other people. And hopefully through the research show, you know, we've produced a report which we'll put a link in for the listeners if they want to have a look at that. It's a kind of an easy report for people to look at in terms of what happened, what the response was, but most importantly, what the impact was on the seafarers like yourself. That's what our report really tries to get home to people, because sometimes that gets lost, especially when things get sent to the government. The human aspect of it, the human story of things gets completely lost. And hopefully people will be able to see that in the report and all the subsequent things that we're going to put out there as well. We ask our guests 2 final questions. First of all, what are you working on next?
So, what am I working next? I think that should be what we're working on next.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
The book of the inside story of the P&O sacking scandal, and then in due course there'll be a second book about the wider industry and, you know, how we quite, you know, got to where we have as well. So that is work in progress that we're very, very nearly completing, and the report that we've done as well. That's only going to enrich the book about this, and if it wasn't for, you know, we wouldn't be able to do that if it wasn't for those seafarers, those unlawfully sacked seafarers that took part in that research. And it's thanks to them that we've been able to produce the report that's been produced, that's going to go out as a public policy paper imminently. So so that's, and the next question was.
The next question, guess, it's a bit of a naughty question, this, because I keep it quite open. But if you could choose one person who you believe has influenced the world of work, who would that person be and why?
I'm going to go for 2.
Okay.
Jayaban Desi. She was the lady who led the workers in the Grunwick dispute many decades ago now, you know, fighting for, you know, better rights in the workplace. And it was quite a famous dispute at the time, an big industrial relations dispute. And the other person would be Samuel Plimsoll, MP.
Yep.
Now, Samuel Plimsoll is a very interesting character. Over 100 years ago, he was fighting in Parliament for an improvement to seafarers' rights. Now, on every ship in the world now, we've got something called a load line. or as it's known in the industry as the plimsoll line. Now, prior to that, then prior to Lloyd's of London Insurance, ship owners would load up the ship. They would take care of their ships, with their cargo wherever they were going. Then once we saw the advent of Lloyd's of London Insurance, etc., some ship owners would overload their ships, perhaps ones that they wanted to claim insurance on. They'd overload them and they send them out, knowing that they wouldn't reach their destination and send the crews to their deaths. These were known as coffin ships. And Samuel Plimsoll campaigned vigorously against this abhorrent practices. And some of the biggest opponents to his campaign were fellow MPs who also happened to be ship owners. And it's thanks to Samuel Plimsoll, and he even wrote a book called Our Seafarers and an Appeal. And his legacy is that one of safety, because without that that load line, the Plimsoll line, ships would still be overloaded, and unscrupulous ship owners would still be sending out so-called coffin ships so they could claim off the insurance. But for me, he's had that huge impact in certainly in the industry that I work in, and for global seafarers as well. So those two, Jayaban Desi, she's an inspiration, and the third, I'm going to name a third actually, because it would be amiss of me not to, being here in Cape Town, and that would be Nelson Mandela, Madiba.
Okay.
Because he fought against injustice, a cruel system that punished people based on the color of their skin, and an abhorrent system. And he was able to unite people, bring them together, and he brought together the global community against the atrocities that were happening here prior to 1997. So they're my three that I would. They're my three: Samuel Plimsoll, Jayaban Desi, and Madiba, Nelson Mandela.
Okay, we'll put 3 links in. I think obviously Nelson Mandela is obviously very, very famous, but we'll put 3 links in just so people can follow up that in terms of find out more about who they are and how they've influenced the world of work. But thanks very much, John. It's been a pleasure knowing you over the last 3 years, and
likewise.
It's been fascinating finding out about who you are, what's happened to you over the last 3.5 years. And hopefully we'll make an impact with the research that we're doing as well. It's been, I think it's tested us, hasn't it, in terms of trying to get stuff done and trying to get access to things. And, it's not been an easy thing, but that's the reason why this research needs to be done, because there isn't access to information because of what happened, the way it was done, and the reticence of people being involved because they are scared of getting involved. And
of course. Absolutely.
Stigmatized or potentially sued as well. So it's been fascinating getting involved with this research and finding out more about your story. And it is a human story that needs to be known, retold, and be remembered.
Yeah, and that's it. And the ultimate thing we all want from this is to prevent this from ever happening again. Line in the sand, finish, no more. Let's see. Time will tell, but we'll persevere.
We will.
And that's what we must. But no, thank you for having me on. Thank you for facilitating this and all your help and support over the last nearly 4 years now. It's coming up for 4 years in April. Time is marching on. But no, thank you very much indeed. And it's always appreciated. And it has been challenging, but we know we're getting it right, and we're doing the right thing.
Okay, John Lansdown, thanks for joining. We can work it out.
Thanks very much indeed.